it's been a while. I'm still getting some things set up because everything decided to crash on me last second and refused to let me log back in. I also can't find several things I need for this. This background isn't set just yet. I'm not entirely sure what I want to do with it because I couldn't remember what world I used for Halloween. So that's fine. Um, I have everything pulled up right now, but I want to get a few things out of the way first. Um, oh, they really shrunk that. That's tiny. My God. Huh. Interesting. So this isn't visible to any viewers, right? But in the corner, usually for me at least, I put it in the corner. There is a bar that shows my viewers, whether or not I'm muted, and if my screen's like working, or like whether or not I have a webcam and stuff like that. So I have that usually, and I thought I didn't for a split second, but I do indeed have it. I'm still getting everything situated, so please bear with me. Um, so I've been gone for 4 months now. There is there are plenty of reasons why, but most of it is just to do with like school and stress and things like that. And I've gone through a lot recently. Um, so there's that, and I just kind of like fell out of being super interested in making content and stuff like that. So I've decided not to move on, but just to do it in bursts like this when I feel like it. So it's fun. We're working with it, and we're gonna see where this takes us. And if I enjoy it again, then that's what I'll do. Um, a lot has happened, so don't that I am choosing not to share. Um, for personal reasons. So there's that. But yeah, we'll start the stories here in a little bit. I still haven't decided on an order yet, but one of them has been downloaded to my phone as a PDF. So and it's the no, it's not the longest one. The longest one is roughly like 30 pages. It's and all of them are quite old, but just like to the point so that I don't have to worry about being murked. So we're gonna work with that. I can absolutely manage. Alright. I'm about to open everything up so I can see chat. Okay. Nice, nice. I just want to see what's going on here and get a better view of things, because I don't need my stream manager fully open, just to where I can see chat and everything. Do I use extensions? Since when? I didn't realize I used sound alerts. Yeah. So this background might change, don't get too used to it. I'm gonna mute that as well. My Discord is blowing up right now. But yeah. So I hope that you enjoy your time here, even if it's not exactly the cheeriest. So before we get into it, just a few more things, I guess. I have a list of things, so I can do this again if I don't get through everything. I don't think I'm going to want to get through everything because I don't want to be here all night. Okay, my tags are right, good. So yeah, what's my category? Because it is technically Minecraft, but it's not. I'm not doing Minecraft stuff. What's that button do? I should quit playing with stuff until email only. Oh wait. Oh my god, that's so. Oh my god. Okay, I'm just like getting excited over stuff that I didn't have access to previously. So I can. Oh, it's perfect. And my rules. Oh, that's perfect. I love it. That's exactly what I wanted. So I think I'm gonna start with There Will Come Soft Rains by Ray Bradbury. Only trigger warnings for this are animal death and implied child death. It's not explicitly stated, but it is in there. Yes, we're reading. Yeah, this short story, just for some context, is a short story by Ray Bradbury based on a poem that has several songs written about it as well. The poem is built into the story itself, so that's interesting. And it's how many pages long? It's easy to find on Google. If you just Google any of these titles and the author, you can find it as a PDF on Google, like first link. So yeah, it's only a few pages long. So let's get into it. In the living room, the voice clock sang, "Tick tock, 7 o'clock. Time to get up. Time to get up. 7 o'clock." As if it were afraid that nobody would. The morning house lay empty. The clock ticked on, repeating and repeating its sounds into the emptiness. 7:09, breakfast time. 7:09. In the kitchen, the breakfast stove gave a hissing sigh and ejected from its warm interior 8 pieces of perfectly browned toast, 8 eggs, sunny side up, 16 slices of bacon, 2 coffees, and 2 cool glasses of milk. "Today's August 4th, 2026, said a second voice from the kitchen ceiling. "In the city of Allendale, California." I repeated the date 3 times for memory's sake. "Today is Mr. Featherstone's birthday. Today is the anniversary of Tilda's marriage. Insurance is payable, as are the water, gas, and light bills." Somewhere in the walls, relays clicked, memory tapes glided under electric eyes. 8:01, tick-tock, 8:01 o'clock, off to school, off to work, run, run, 8:01. But no doors slammed, no carpets took the soft tread of rubber heels. It was raining outside. The weather box on the front door sang quietly, "Rain, rain, go away, umbrellas, raincoats for today." And the rain tapped on the empty house, echoing. Outside, the garage chimed and lifted its door to reveal the waiting chair. After a long wait, the door swung down again. At 8:30, the eggs were shriveled and the toast was like stone. An aluminum wedge scraped them into the sink, where hot water whirled them down the metal throat which digested and flushed them away to the distant sea. The dirty dishes were dropped into a hot water washer and emerged twinkling dry. 9:15, said the clock. Time to clean. Out of the warrens in the wall, tiny robot mice darted. The rooms were a crawl with the small cleaning animals, all rubber and metal. They thudded against chairs, whirling their mustached runners, kneading the rug nabs, sucking gently at hidden dust. Then, like mysterious invaders, they popped into their burrows, their pink electric eyes faded. The house was clean. 10 o'clock. The sun came out from behind the rain. The house stood alone in a city of rubble and ashes. This was the one house left standing. At night, the ruined city gave off a radioactive glow which could be seen for miles. 10:15. The garden sprinklers whirled up in golden founts, filling the soft morning air with scatterings of brightness. The water-pelted window panes rained down the charred west side where the house had been burned, evenly free of its white paint. The entire west face of the house was black, save for 5 places. Here, the silhouette in paint of a man mowing a lawn. Here, as in a photograph, a woman bent to pick flowers. Still farther over, their images burned on wood in one titanic instant. A small boy, hands flung into the air. Higher up, the image of a thrown ball, and opposite him a girl, hands raised to catch a ball which never came down. The 5 spots of paint, the man, the woman, the children, the ball, remained. The rest was a thin, charcoal layer. The gentle sprinkler ran through the garden with flailing light. Until this day, how well the house had kept its peace, how carefully it had inquired, "Who goes there? What's the password?" And, getting no answer from the lonely foxes and whining cats, it had shut up its windows and drawn shades in an old maidenly preoccupation with self-protection which bordered on mechanical paranoia. It quivered at each sound, the house did. If a sparrow brushed a window, the shade snapped up. The bird, startled, flew off. No, not even a bird must touch the house. 12 noon. A dog whined, shivering on the front porch. The front door recognized the dog voice and opened. The dog, once huge and fleshy, but now gone to bone and covered with sores, moved in and through the house, tracking mud. Behind it whirred angry mice, angry having to pick up mud, angry at inconvenience. For not a leaf fragment blew under the door, but when the wall panels flipped open and the copper scrap rats flashed swiftly out. The offending dust, hair, or paper seized in miniature steel jaws, was raced back to the burrows. There, down tubes which fed into the cellar, it was dropped into the sighing vent of an incinerator, which sat like evil ball in the dark corner. The dog ran upstairs, hysterically yelping to each door, at last realizing, as the house realized, that only silence was here. It sniffed the air and scratched the kitchen door. Behind the door, the stove was baking pancakes, which filled the house with a rich baked odor and the scent of maple syrup. The dog frothed at the mouth, lying at the door, sniffing, its eyes turned to fire. It ran wildly in circles, biting its tail, spun in a frenzy, and died. It lay in the parlor for an hour. 2 o'clock, sang a voice. Delicately sensing decay at last, the regiments of mice hummed out as softly as blown gray leaves in an electrical wind. 2:15. The dog was gone. In the cellar, an incinerator glowed suddenly, and a whirl of sparks leaped up the chimney. 2:35. Bridge tables spouted from patio walls, playing cards fluttered onto pads in a shower of pips. Martinis manifested on an oaken bench with egg salad sandwiches. Music played, but the tables were silent and the cards untouched. At 4 o'clock, the tables folded like great butterflies back into the paneled walls. 4:30. The nursery walls glowed. Animals took shape: yellow giraffes, blue lions, pink antelopes, lilac panthers cavorting in crystal substance. The walls were glass. They looked out upon color and fantasy, hidden in films, clocked through well-oiled sprockets, and the walls lived. The nursery floors woven to resemble crisp, surreal meadow. Over this ran aluminum roaches and iron crickets, and in the hot, still air butterflies of delicate red tissue wavered among the sharp aroma of animal spores. There was a sound like a great matted yellow hive of bees within a dark bellows, the lazy bumble of a purring lion, and there was a patter of okapi feet and a murmur of fresh jungle rain, like other hooves, falling upon summer-starched grass. Now the walls dissolved into distances of parched grass, mile and mile, in warm, endless sky. The animals drew away into thorn breaks and water holes. It was the children's hour. 5 o'clock. The bath filled with clear hot water. 6, 7, 8 o'clock. The dinner dishes manipulated like magic tricks, and steady a click. In the metal stand opposite the hearth, where the fire now blazed up warmly, a cigar popped out, half an inch of soft gray ash on it, smoking, waiting. 9 o'clock. The beds warmed their hidden circuits, for nights were cool here. 9:05. A voice steady ceiling. "Mrs. McClellan, which poem would you like this evening?" The house was silent. The voice said at last, "Since you express no preference, I shall select a poem at random." Quiet music rose to back the voice. "Sarah Teasdale, as I recall, your favorite." "There will come soft rains in the smell of the ground, and swallows circling with their shimmering sound, and frogs in the pools singing at night, and wild plum trees in tremulous white. Robins will wear their feathery fire, whistling their whims on a low fence wire. And not one will know of the war, not one will care at last when it is done. Not one would mind, neither bird nor tree, if mankind perished utterly. And spring herself, when she woke at dawn, would scarcely know that we were gone." The fire burned on the stone hearth, and the cigar fell away into a mound of quiet ash on its tray. The empty chairs faced each other between silent walls, and the music played. At 10 o'clock, the house began to die. The wind blew. A falling tree bough crashed through the kitchen window. Cleaning solvent, bottled, shattered over the stove. The room was ablaze in an instant. Fire! Screamed a voice. The house lights flashed, water pumps shot water from the ceilings, but the solvent spread on the linoleum, licking and eating under the kitchen door, while the voices took it up in chorus. Fire! 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 The house tried to save itself. Doors sprang tightly shut, but the windows were broken by the heat, and the wind blew in and sucked upon the fire. The house gave ground as the fire and 10 billion angry sparks moved with flaming ease from room to room and then up the stairs, while scurrying water rats squeaked from the walls, pistoled their water, and ran for more. And the wall sprays let down showers of mechanical rain. But too late, somewhere sighing, a pump shrugged to a stop. The quenching rain ceased. The reserve water supply which had filled baths and washed dishes for many quiet days was gone. The fire crackled up the stairs. It fed upon Picassos and Matisses in the upper halls like delicacies, baking off the oily flesh, tenderly crisping the canvases into black shavings. Now the fire lay in bed, stood in windows, changed the colors of drapes, and then reinforcements. Frantic trapdoors, blind robot faces, peered down with faucet mouths gushing green chemical. The fire backed off, as even an elephant must at the sight of a dead snake. Now there were 20 snakes whipping over the floor, killing the fire with a clear, cold venom of green froth. But the fire was clever. It sent flame outside the house, up through the attic to the pumps there. An explosion. The attic brain which directed the pumps was shattered into bronze shrapnel on the beams. The fire rushed back into every closet and felt the clothes that hung there. The house shuddered, oak bone on bone, its bare skeleton cringing from the heat, its wire, its nerves revealed as if a surgeon had torn the skin off and let the red veins and capillaries quiver in the scalded air. Help, help, fire, run, run! Heat snapped mirrors like the first brittle winter ice, and the voices wailed, Fire, fire, run, run! Like a tragic nursery rhyme. A dozen voices, high, low, like children dying in a forest, alone, alone. And the voices fading as the wires popped their sheathings like hot chestnuts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 voices died. In the nursery, the jungle burned. Blue lions roared, purple giraffes bounded off, the panthers ran in circles, changing color, and 10 million animals running before the fire vanished off toward a distant, steaming river. 10 more voices died. In the last instant under the fire avalanche, other choruses, oblivious, could be heard announcing the time, cutting the lawn by remote control mower, or setting an umbrella frantically out and in. The slamming and opening front door, 1,000 things happening like a clock shop when each clock strikes the hour insanely before or after the other, the scene of maniac confusion, yet unity. Singing, screaming, a few last cleaning mice darting bravely out to carry the horrid ashes away, and one voice, a sublime disregard for the situation, read poetry aloud in a fiery study, until all the film spools burned, until all the wires withered and the circuits cracked. The fire burst the house and let it slam flat down, puffing out skirts of spark and smoke. In the kitchen, an instant before the rain of fire and timber, a stove could be seen making breakfast at a psychopathic rate. 10 dozen eggs, 6 loaves of toast, 20 dozen bacon strips, which, eaten by fire, started the stove working again, hysterically hissing. The crash, the attic smashing into kitchen and parlor, the parlor into cellar, the cellar into subcellar, deep freeze armchair, film tape circus beds, and all like skeletons thrown in a cluttered mound deep under. Smoke and silence. A great quantity of smoke. Dawn showed faintly in the east. Among the ruins, one wall stood alone. Within the wall, a last voice said, over and over, again and again, even as the sun rose to shine upon the heaped rubble and steam. Today is August 5th, 2026. Today is August 5th, 2026. Today is... And that is There Will Come Soft Rains by Ray Bradbury. I actually have the sheet music for the Robert Sheldon composition of that piece. It's a very pretty piece, but that's besides the point. We're doing good right now. That's surprising. I might have blown out my candle here soon, but yeah, poor house. Okay, so next we could either have the box social, the lottery, or the yellow wallpaper. The yellow wallpaper is by far the longest, but it's the most chilling, so I kind of want to save it for last. Um, in between that, okay. Quick rundown. It's it's a very, very good poem. Yeah. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I put on a texture pack for this. Is the weather still okay? Give me a second to fix the weather. There we go. Yellow wallpaper. It's the longest, so I kind of want to save it for last. Because it's like 20, 30 minutes long. Because I've read it out loud before. It's about like roughly 30 minutes long. The box social is quite short. It'll be a nice relief before the two longer ones. Okay. This is The Box Social by James Reaney. Do you know where I put my gold paint, Auntie? She painted some. Swans under bridges with... Oh, I forgot to do trigger warnings for this. Um, Thank you. Trigger warnings for this. Like, miscarriage or like stillbirth mention. I think that's it. Give me a second to mute my mic and go blow out my candle so I don't burn my house down again. Emphasis on again. Alright, taken care of. So yeah. I'm having fun. The Box Social by James Reaney. Feel free. This one should only take like 15 minutes tops. It's not that long. Like at most 15 minutes. So just dip out for a little bit if you need to. I'll still be waiting when you get back. Do you know where I put my gold paint, Auntie? She painted some. Swans under bridges with water lilies, old ladies at windows reading lugubrious of Bibles. Tonight she was decorating a shoebox for the box social they were having at the school the next night. No one expected her to come. She had been quite ill for the last 3 weeks and hadn't appeared at the last institute meeting. Now, however, she felt well enough. She was a bit pale and looked much thinner, but she simply had to go. All that evening she sat in the kitchen cutting up old scraps of wallpaper and pasting them on the shoebox in various patterns with flour paste. Her box of lunch would be the prettiest there, and the men would bid so high for it. All she needed now was some gold paint, but of course Aunt had gone to bed hours ago. If Sylvia had any profession at all, it was doing pretty little things like this. Little useless things, for her real vocation had apparently been to stay home and help her aunt with the housework. What she needed now was something to line the box with. It would look so much more beautiful with the sandwiches and little bottles of olives set against some deep, rich color. Shoe boxes were so wonderfully white. The rain was falling in soft applause outside. Her fingers were white from the paste she had been using. The candle in her hand sprouted a yellow willow leaf. She was in the outhouse, searching for the tiny attic for a roll of gorgeous parlor wallpaper she remembered her aunt having left there. Her father always forgot to put down the lids. The two holes stared at her like a man with a large eye and a small one. Finding what she wanted, she stepped out and stood still for a moment. The rain sloughed the candle out. There was the wind in the elderberry bushes. The little things were breathing as hard as if they were swimming across the North Sea. And another sound, that of St. James's bells all the way from town. Some notes were lost, but she gathered it must be 12. No clock should have any less to say than 12, unless it were 1, at such an hour so silent and so black. 12 black strokes, 12 black hair ribbons. She walked across the fence beneath the fir trees a bit. The nightshade berries grew here with their wicked fruit. The very next field was lined with furrows as if it had been a large frown or a copybook. It was not her father's field. Someone else had plowed it. Furrow after furrow after furrow, his house lay where he had now lay sleeping, and she hated him. Then her own house, a faint pale light from the 2 kitchen windows. There the decorated shoebox lay almost ready for the box social. Every room of the house, both in their ancient and modern styles, met in Parliament on its flat, thin sides. Already the event, the box social, gleamed in the distance like a lantern at the end of the dark stable. There were half a dozen cars parked at the school. Cars have such beautiful behinds of ruby-red roses that wink at you. Sylvia watched across the fields. Neither her aunt nor her father wished to go. She held the precious box between her arms. Not between, in her arms. It was wrapped in brown paper to protect it from the rain. Why, you're better. Yes, I am. There were 30 people here. No one was as pale as she was. She looked like the queen on the playing card, in her rich red dress, holding the gay box in her lap. All the children's desks were cowering in one corner, for there was to be dancing. Already somebody was sprinkling boracic acid on the floor. Not that it really makes the floor slippery, but everyone is sure that it does, and it feels much more exciting. The fiddler played 6 tunes. He only knew 5. Miss Twite wasn't dancing at all, not even with her husband, because they used the school as a Sunday school on Sundays, and it would be like dancing in a church. Then out stole a little green table, and then another green table, and another. Everyone was playing euchre until they should dance again. I passed, pale-face, joker. They wouldn't be dancing now until after the lunch. Mr. Deloney, one of the 3 farmers in the neighborhood who owned a silo, was arranging the boxes on the teacher's desk. Sylvia was very careful with her hands lest she eat them, and the teacher had pinned up the winter ornamental border above the west blackboard with all the gay coaches galloping from the north of the room to the south. This lovely box wrapped in green. What young gentleman wants to eat with the pretty young lady who has wrapped her box in green? All the men were crowding up. Hers was almost the last, and he was bidding for it. $5. It had looked so nice. He came straight to her. I knew it was yours. Recognized the wallpaper. Very pretty. You aren't mad at me any more. He sat down, quite comfortable, and began untying the black ribbon. The school clock that they had both looked at together to see if it were recess time ticked loudly above them. He lifted the lid and sat staring at what lay inside, his great hands unusually white on top of the green baize card table. And between them the little shoebox glistened with scarlet wallpaper and gilt like a fairy coffin. Inside it there was the crabbed corpse of a stillborn child wreathed in bloody newspaper. I hated you so much, she said softly. And that is that. The Bog Social by James Reaney. Alright, we'll give it a little bit to let everybody catch up. Yes, fetus. Just one moment to figure this out. You'd think after playing this game for so long, I'd figure out that there was a tab for weather cycle. I've said it before and I'll say it again, I've played Minecraft since 2012. Alright, there's 2 more left. Let me see how long the lottery is, and see if I do still want to read it, and see how long we've been going for. We've been going for a little bit. I miss when it would tell me how long. If I just take me to my... Excuse me? Oh, we've only been going for half an hour. It's alright. Turn it. There we go. Perfect. Yeah, this isn't relevant, but I think I'm developing psoriasis. Alright, let me see how long this is real quick. Oh, it's about the same length. It's probably a little shorter. It's about the same length. I'll just go ahead and read them both. I'm not doing anything tomorrow. This is The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. Is there anything I need to warn about? I don't think there's anything that requires a warning. It should be fine. I've read it a few times and it was fine all those times, so I should be fine. Alright, yeah. The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. The morning of June 27th was clear and sunny, with the fresh warmth of a full summer day. The flowers were blossoming profusely, and the grass was richly green. The people of the village began to gather in the square, between the post office and the bank. Around 10 o'clock in some towns, there were so many people that the lottery took 2 days, and it had to be started on June 26th. But in this village, where there were only about 300 people, the whole lottery took only about 2 hours. So it could begin at 10 o'clock in the morning and still be through in time to allow the villagers to get home for noon dinner. The children assembled first, of course. School was recently over for the summer, and the feeling of liberty sat uneasily on most of them. They tended to gather together quietly for a while before they broke into boisterous play, and their talk of was still of the classroom and the teacher, of books and reprimands. Bobby Martin had already stuffed his pockets full of stones, and the other boys soon followed his example, selecting the smoothest and roundest stones. Bobby and Harry Jones and Dickie Delacroix, the villagers mispronounced this name, Delacroix, eventually made a great pile of stones in one corner of the square and guarded it against the raids of the other boys. The girls stood aside, talking among themselves, looking over their shoulders at the boys, and the very small children rolled in the dust or clung to the hands of their older brothers or sisters. Soon the men began to gather, surveying their own children, speaking of planting and rain, tractors and taxes. They stood together, away from the pile of stones in the corner, and their jokes were quiet, and they smiled rather than laughed. The women, wearing faded house dresses and sweaters, came shortly after their menfolk. They greeted one another and exchanged bits of gossip as they went to join their husbands. Soon the women, standing by their husbands, began to call to their children, and the children came reluctantly, having to be called 4 or 5 times. Bobby Martin ducked under his mother's grasping hand and ran laughing back to the pile of stones. His father spoke up sharply, and Bobby came quickly and took his place between his father and his oldest brother. Go ahead. I can't hear you, so go ahead and do your monologue. The lottery was conducted, as were the square dances, the teenage club, the Halloween program, by Mr. Summers, who had all the time and energy to devote to civic activities. He was a round-faced, jovial man, and he ran a coal business, and people were sorry for him because he had no children and his wife was a scold. When he arrived in the square, carrying the black wooden box, there was a murmur of conversation among the villagers, and he waved and called, "Little late today, folks?" The postmaster, Mr. Graves, followed him, carrying a 3-legged stool, and the stool was put in the center of the square, and Mr. Summers set the black box down on it. The villagers kept their distance, leaving the space between themselves and the stool, and when Mr. Summers said, "Some of you fellows want to give me a hand?" there was a hesitation before 2 men, Mr. Martin and his oldest son Baxter, came forward to hold the box steady on the stool while Mr. Summers stirred up the papers inside it. The original paraphernalia for the lottery had been lost long ago, and the black box now resting on the stool had been put to use even before Old Man Warner, the oldest man in town, was born. Mr. Summers spoke frequently to the villagers about making a new box, but no one liked to upset even as much tradition as was represented by the black box. There was a story that the present box had been made with some pieces of the box that had preceded it, and the one that had been constructed when the first people settled down to make a village here. Every year after the lottery, Mr. Summers began talking again about a new box, but every year this subject was allowed to fade off without anything's being done. The black box grew shabbier each year, and by now it was no longer completely black, but splintered badly along one side to show the original wood color, and in some places faded or stained. Mr. Martin and his oldest son Baxter held the black box securely on the stool until Mr. Summers had stirred the papers thoroughly with his hand. Because of so much the ritual had been forgotten or discarded, Mr. Summers had been successful in having slips of paper substitute for the chips of wood that had been used for generations. The chips of wood, Mr. Summers had argued, had all been very well in the village when the village was tiny, but now that the population was more than 300 and likely to keep on growing, it was necessary to use something that would fit more easily into the black box. The night before the lottery, Mr. Summers and Mr. Graves made up the slips of paper and put them into the box, and it was then taken to the safe of Mr. Summers' coal supply company and locked up until Mr. Summers was ready to take it to the square the next morning. The rest of the year the box was put away, sometimes one place, sometimes another. It had spent 1 year in Mr. Graves' barn and another year underfoot in the post office. Sometimes it was set on the shelf in the Martin grocery and left there. There was a great deal of fussing to be done before Mr. Summers declared the lottery open. There were lists to make up, of heads of families, heads of households in each family, members of each household in each family. There was the proper swearing in of Mr. Summers by the postmaster as the official of the lottery. At one time, some people remembered there had been a recital of some sort, performed by the official of the lottery, a perfunctory, tuneless chant that had been rattled off dully each year. Some people believed that the official of the lottery used to stand just so when he said or sang it. Others believed he was supposed to walk among the people. But years and years ago, this part of the ritual had been allowed to lapse. There had been, also, a ritual salute, which the official of the lottery had to use in addressing each person who came out to draw off the box. But this had also changed with time. Until now, it was felt necessary only for the official to speak to each person approaching. Mr. Summers was very good at all this. In his clean white shirt and blue jeans, with one hand resting carelessly on the black box, he seemed very proper and important as he talked interminably to Mr. Graves and the Martins. Just as Mr. Summers finally left off talking and turned to the assembled villagers, Mrs. Hutchinson came hurriedly along the path to the square, her sweater thrown over her shoulders, and slid into place at the back of the crowd. "Clean forgot what day it was," she said to Mrs. Delacroix, who stood next to her, and they both laughed softly. "Thought my old man was out back stacking wood," Mrs. Hutchinson went on, "and I looked out the window and the kids was gone, and then I remembered it was the 27th and came a-running." She dried her hands on her apron, and Mrs. Delacroix said, "You're in time, though. They're still talking way up there." Mrs. Hutchinson craned her neck to see through the crowd and found her husband and children standing near the front. She tapped Mrs. Delacroix on the arm as a farewell, and began to make her way through the crowd. The people separated good-humoredly to let her through. 2 or 3 people said, in voices just loud enough to be heard across the crowd, "Here comes your Mrs. Hutchinson," and "Bill, she made it after all." Mrs. Hutchinson reached her husband, and Mr. Summers, who had been waiting, said cheerfully, "Thought we were going to have to get on without you, Tessie." Mrs. Hutchinson said, grinning, Wouldn't have me leave my dishes in the sink now, would you, Joe?" And soft laughter ran through the crowd as people stirred back into position after Mrs. Hutchinson's arrival. "Well now," Mr. Summers said soberly, "guess we better get started, get this over with, so we can get back to work. Anybody ain't here?" "Dunbar," several people said. "Dunbar, Dunbar." Mr. Summers consulted his list. "Clyde Dunbar," he said. "That's right. He broke his leg, hasn't he? Who's drawing for him?" "Me, I guess," a woman said, and Mr. Summers turned to look at her. "Wife draws for her husband," Mr. Summers said. "Don't you have a grown boy to do it for you, Janie?" Although Mr. Summers and everyone else in the village knew the answer perfectly well, it was the business of the official of the lottery to ask such questions formally. Mr. Summers waited with an expression of polite interest while Mrs. Dunbar answered. "Horace is not but 16 yet," Mrs. Dunbar said regretfully. "I guess I gotta fill in for the old man this year." "Right," Mr. Summers said. He made a note in the list he was holding. Then he asked, "Watson boy drawing this year?" A tall boy in the crowd raised his hand. "Here," he said. "I'm drawing for my mother and me." He blinked his eyes nervously and ducked his head as several voices in the crowd said things like, "Good fellow, Jack," and "Glad to see your mother's got a man to do it." "Well," Mr. Summers said, "guess that's everyone. Old man Warner make it?" "Here," a voice said, and Mr. Summers nodded. A sudden hush fell on the crowd as Mr. Summers cleared his throat and looked at the list. "All ready?" he called. Now, I'll read the names. Heads of families first, and the men come up and take a paper out of the box. Keep the paper folded in your hand without looking at it until everyone has had a turn. Everything clear? The people had done it so many times that they only half listened to the directions. Most of them were quiet, wetting their lips, not looking around. Then Mr. Summers raised one hand high and said, "Adams." A man disengaged himself from the crowd and came forward. "Hi, Steve," Mr. Summers said, and Mr. Adams said, "Hi, Joe." They grinned at each other humorlessly and nervously. Then Mr. Adams reached into the black box and took out a folded paper. He held it firmly by one corner and as he turned and went hastily back to his place in the crowd, where he stood a little apart from his family, not looking down at his hand. "Allen," Mr. Summers said, "Anderson, Bentham. It seems there's no time at all between lotteries any more," Miss Delacroix said to the Mrs. Graves in the back row. "Seems like we got through the last one only last week." "Time sure goes fast," Mrs. Graves said. "Clark, Delacroix." "There goes my old man," Mrs. Delacroix said. She held her breath while her husband went forward. "Dunbar," Mr. Summers said. Mrs. Dunbar went steadily to the box while one of the women said, "Go on, Janey," and another said, "There she goes." I'm gonna conk out on you guys. It's alright. "We're next," Mrs. Graves said. She watched while Mr. Graves came round from the side of the box, greeted Mr. Summers gravely, and selected a slip of paper from the box. By now, all through the crowd, there were men holding the small folded papers in their large hands, turning them over and over nervously. Mrs. Dunbar and her two sons stood together, Mrs. Dunbar holding the slip of paper. "Harbert, Hutchinson." "Get up there, Bill," Mrs. Hutchinson said, and the people near her laughed. "Jones." "They do say," Mr. Adams said to old man Warner, who stood next to him, "that over in the North Village they're talking of giving up the lottery." Old man Warner snorted. "Pack of crazy fools," he said. "Listen to the young folks. Nothing's good enough for them. Next thing you know, they'll be wanting to go back to living in caves. Nobody work any more. Live that way for a while. Used to be saying about lottery in June, corn be heavy soon. First thing you know, we'll all be eating stewed chickweed and acorns. There's always been a lottery," he added petulantly. "Bad enough to see young Joe Summers up there joking with everybody." "Some places have already quit lotteries," Mrs. Adams said. "Nothing but trouble in that," old man Warner said stoutly. "Pack of young fools." Bobby Martin watched his father go forward. "Overdyke, Percy." "I wish they'd hurry," Mrs. Dunbar said to her older son. "I wish they'd hurry." "They're almost through," her son said. "You get ready to run tell Dad," Miss Dunbar said. Mr. Summers called his own name and then stepped forward precisely and selected a slip from the box. Then he called, "Warner." "77th year I've been in the lottery," old man Warner said as he went through the crowd. "77th time." "Watson." The tall boy came awkwardly through the crowd. Someone said, "Don't be nervous, Jack." And Mr. Summers said, "Take your time, son." "Zanini." After that there was a long pause, a breathless pause, until Mr. Summers, holding his slip of paper in the air, said, "All right, fellows." For a minute no one moved. And then all the slips of paper were opened. Suddenly all the women began to speak at once, saying, "Who is it? Who's got it? Is it the Dunbars? Is it the Watsons?" Then the voices began to say, "It's Hutchinson. It's Bill. Bill Hutchinson's got it." "Go tell your father," Miss Dunbar said to her older son. People began to look around to see the Hutchinsons. Bill Hutchinson was sitting quiet, staring down at the paper in his hand. Suddenly Tessie Hutchinson shouted to Mr. Summers, "You didn't give him time enough to pick any paper he wanted. I saw you. It wasn't fair." "Be a good sport, Tessie," Miss Delacroix called, and Mrs. Graves said, "All of us took the same chance." "Shut up, Tessie," Bill Hutchinson said. "Well, everyone," Mr. Summers said, "that was done pretty fast. Now we've got to be hurrying a little more to get done in time." He consulted his next list. "Bill," he said, "you draw for the Hutchinson family. You got any other households in the Hutchinsons?" "There's Dawn and Ava," Miss Hutchinson yelled. "Make them take their chance." "Daughters draw of their husbands' families, Tessie," Mr. Summers said gently. You know that as well as anybody else. It wasn't fair, Tessie said. I guess not, Joe, Bill Hutchinson said regretfully. My daughter draws with her husband's family, and that's only fair, and I've got no other family except the kids. Then, as far as drawing for families is concerned, it's you, Mr. Summers said in explanation. As far as drawing for households is concerned, that's you too, right? Right, Bill Hutchinson said. How many kids, Bill? Mr. Summers asked formally. 3, Bill Hutchinson said. There's Bill Jr. and Nancy and little Dave and Tessie and me. All right then, Mr. Summers said. Harry, you got their tickets back? Mr. Graves nodded and held up the slips of paper. Put them in the box then, Mr. Summers directed. Take Bill's and put it in. I think we ought to start over, Miss Hutchinson said as quietly as she could. I tell you, it wasn't fair. You didn't give him time enough to choose. Everybody saw that. Mr. Graves selected the 5 slips and put them in the box. He dropped all the papers but those onto the ground, where the breeze caught them and lifted them off. Listen, everybody, Miss Hutchinson was saying to the people around her. Ready, Bill? Mr. Summers asked, and Bill Hutchinson, with one quick glance around his wife and children, nodded. Remember, Mr. Summers said, take the slips and keep them folded until each person has taken one. Harry, you help little Dave. Mr. Graves took the hand of the little boy, who willingly came up with him to the box. Take a paper out of the box, Davy, Mr. Summers said. Davy put his hand in the box and laughed. Take just one paper, Mr. Summers said. Harry, you hold it for him. Mr. Graves took the child's hand and removed the folded paper from the tight fist and held it while little Dave stood next to him and looked up at him worryingly. Nancy next, Mr. Summers said. Nancy was 12, and her school friends breathed heavily as she went forward, switching her skirt, and took a slip daintily from the box. Bill Jr., Mr. Summers said, and Billy, his face red and his feet overlarge, nearly knocked the box over as he got a paper out. Tessie, Mr. Summers said. She hesitated for a minute, looking around defiantly, then set her lips and went up to the box. She snatched a paper out and held it behind her. Bill, Mr. Summers said. And Bill Hutchinson reached into the box and felt around, bringing his hand out at last with the slip of paper in it. The crowd was quiet. A girl whispered, I hope it's not Nancy. And the sound of the whisper reached the edges of the crowd. It's not the way it used to be, Old Man Warner said clearly. People ain't the way they used to be. All right, Mr. Summers said. Open the papers. Harry, you open little Dave's. Mr. Graves opened the slip of paper, and there was a general sigh through the crowd as he held it up, and everyone could see that it was blank. Nancy and Bill Jr. opened theirs at the same time. Both beamed and laughed, turning round to the crowd and holding their slips of paper above their heads. Tessie, Mr. Summers said. There was a pause, and then Mr. Summers looked at Bill Hutchinson, and Bill unfolded his paper and showed it. It was blank. It's Tessie, Mr. Summers said, and his voice was hushed. Show us her paper, Bill. Bill Hutchinson went over to his wife and forced the slip of paper out of her hand. It had a black spot on it, the black spot Mr. Summers had made the night before with a heavy pencil in the coal company office. Bill Hutchinson held it up, and there was a stir in the crowd. All right, folks, Mr. Summers said. Let's finish quickly. Although the villagers had forgotten the ritual and lost the original black box, they still remembered to use stones. The pile of stones the boys had made earlier was ready. There were stones on the ground and the blowing scraps of paper that had come out of the box. Miss Delacroix selected a stone so large she had to pick it up with both hands and turned to Mrs. Dunbar. Come on, she said. Hurry up. Miss Dunbar had small stones in both hands, and she said, gasping for breath, I can't run at all. You'll have to go ahead and I'll catch up with you. The children had stones ready, and someone gave little Davy Hutchinson a few pebbles. Tessie Hutchinson was in the center of a cleared space by now, and she held her hands out desperately as the villagers moved in on her. It isn't fair, she said. A stone hit her on the side of the head. Old Man Warner was saying, come on, everyone. Steve Adams was in the front of the crowd of villagers, with Mrs. Graves beside him. It isn't fair. It isn't right, Mrs. Hutchinson screamed. And then they were upon her. And that will be The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. We only have one more left if everyone's still up for it. It's a lot longer. We've been going for almost an hour now. But yeah, good night, Soda. Yeah, I got one more. It's the actual thing itself is 55 pages long, but a lot of the pages just end up being almost blank, like at the end of a chapter, per se. But yeah, I'm up for one more, if everybody else is. Do it. Alright, we can do it. I read this one last night out loud and in general for the second time. This one is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Or Stetson. I think Gilman was her married name. I can't remember though. It is very seldom that mere ordinary people like John and myself secure ancestral halls for the summer. A colonial mansion, a hereditary estate, I would say a haunted house, and reach the height of romantic felicity, but that would be asking too much of fate. Still, I will proudly declare that there is something odd about it. Else, why should it be so cheaply, and why have stood so long unattended? John laughs at me, of course, but one expects that in marriage. John is practical in the extreme. He has no patience with faith and an intense horror of superstition, and he scoffs openly at any talk of things not to be felt and seen and put down in figures. John is a physician, and perhaps, I would not say this to a living soul, of course, but it is dead paper and a great relief to my mind. Perhaps that is one reason I did not get well faster. You see, he does not believe I am sick. And what can one do? If a physician of high standing and one's own husband assures friends and relatives that there's really nothing the matter with one but temporary nervous trigger warnings, intense paranoia, and an incredibly unreliable narrator. Alright, bye-bye. Yeah. Major trigger warning for, intense paranoia and an unreliable narrator. So... If a physician of high standing and one's own husband assures friends and relatives that a slight hysterical tendency, what is one to do? My brother is also a physician and also of high standing, and he says the same thing. So I take phosphates or phosphites, whichever it is, and tonics, and journeys in air, and exercise, and am absolutely forbidden to work until I am well again. Personally, I disagree with their ideas. Personally, I believe that congenial work with excitement and change would do me good. But what is one to do? I did write for a while in spite of them, but it does exhaust me a good deal, having to be so sly about it, or else meet with heavy opposition. I sometimes fancy that in my condition, if I had less opposition and more society and stimulus, but John says the very worst thing I can do is think about my condition. And to confess, it always makes me feel bad. So, I will let it alone and talk about the house. The most beautiful place. It is quite alone, standing well back from the road, quite 3 miles from the village. It makes me think of English places that you would read about, for there are hedges and walls and gates that lock, and lots of separate little houses for the gardeners and people. There is a delicious garden. I never saw such a garden, large and lined with long grape-covered arbors with seats under them. There were greenhouses too, but they are all broken now. There was some legal trouble, I believe, something about the heirs and co-heirs. Anyhow, the place has been empty for years. That spoils my ghostliness, I'm afraid, but I don't care. There's something strange about the house. I can feel it. I even said so to John one moonlight evening, but he said what I felt was draught, and shut the window. I get unreasonably angry with John sometimes. I'm sure I never used to be so sensitive. I think it is due to this nervous condition. But John says if I feel so, I shall neglect proper self-control, so I take pains to control myself. Before him, at least. And it makes me very tired. I don't like our room one bit. I wanted one downstairs that opened on the piazza and had roses all over the window, and such pretty old-fashioned chintz hangings. but John would not hear of it. He said there was only one window and not room for 2 beds, and no near room for him if he took another. He is very careful and loving and hardly lets me stir without special direction. I have a scheduled prescription for each hour in the day, and he takes all care from me, so I feel basically ungrateful not to value it more. They came here. He said we came here solely on my account, and I was to have perfect rest and all the air I could get. Your exercise depends on your sweet strength, my dear, said he, and your food somewhat on your appetite, but air you can absorb all the time. So we took the nursery at the top of the house. It is a big, airy room, the whole floor neatly, with windows that look all ways, and air and sunshine galore. It was nursery first, then playground, and then gymnasium, I should judge, for the windows are barred for little children, and there are rings and things in the walls. The paint and paper looks as if a boys' school had used it. It is stripped off the paper in great patches all around the head of my bed, about as far as I could reach, and in great place on the other side of the room, low down. I never saw a worse paper in my life. One of those sprawling, flamboyant patterns, every artistic sin. It was dull enough to confuse the eye in following, pronounced enough to constantly irritate and provoke study, and when you follow the lame, uncertain curves for a little distance, they suddenly commit non-exist, plunge off at outrageous angles, destroy themselves in unheard-of contradictions. The color is repellent, almost revolting, a smoldering, unclean yellow, strangely faded by the slow-turning sunlight. It is a dull, lurid orange in some places, a sickly sulphur tint in others. No wonder the children hated it. I should hate it myself if I had to live in this room long. There comes John, and I must put this away. He hates to have me write a word. We have been here 2 weeks, and I haven't felt like writing before since the first day. I'm sitting by the window now, up in this atrocious nursery, and there's nothing to hinder my writing as much as I please, save lack of strength. John is away all day, and even some nights when his cases are serious. I'm glad my case is not serious. But these nervous troubles are dreadfully depressing. John does not know how much I really suffer. He knows there is no reason to suffer, and that satisfies him. Of course, it is only nervousness, and it does weigh on me so not to do my duty in any way. I meant to be such a help to John, such a real festing comfort, and here I am a comparative burden already. Nobody would believe what an effort it is to do what little I am able, to dress and entertain and order things. It is fortunate Mary is so good with the baby, is such a dear baby, and yet I cannot be with him. It just makes me so nervous. I suppose John never was nervous in his life, and he laughs at me so about this wallpaper. At first he meant to repaper the room, but afterwards he said that I was letting it get the better of me, and that nothing was worse for a nervous patient than to give way to such fancies. He said that after the wallpaper was changed it would be the heavy bedstead, and the barred windows, and the gate at the head of the stairs, and so on. You know this place is only doing you good, he said, and really, dear, I don't care to renovate the house just for a 3 months' rental. Then do let us go downstairs, I said. There are such pretty rooms there. And then he took me in his arms and called me a blessed little goose, and he would go down cellar if I wished, and have it whitewashed into the bargain. But he is right enough about the beds and windows and things. It is airy and comfortable a room as anyone need wish, and of course I would not be so silly as to make him uncomfortable just for a whim. I am really getting quite fond of the big room, all but the horrid paper. Out of one window I see the garden whose mysterious deep-shaded arbors, the righteous old flowers and bushes and gnarly trees. Out of another I get a lovely view of the bay and a little private wharf belonging to the estate. There is a beautiful shaded lane that runs down there from the house. I always fancy I see people walking in these numerous paths and arbors, but John has cautioned me not to give way to fancy in the least. He says that with my imaginative power and habit of story-making, a nervous weakness like mine is sure to lead to all manner of excited fancies, and that I ought to use my will and good sense to check the tendency. So I try. I think sometimes if I were only well enough to write a little, it would relieve the press of ideas and rest me. But I get pretty tired when I try. It is so discouraging not to have any advice and companionship about my work. When I get really well, John says we will ask Cousin Henry and Julia down for a long visit, but he says he would as soon put fireworks in my pillowcase as to let me have those stimulating people about now. I wish I could get well faster. I must not think about that. The paper looks to me as if it knew what a vicious influence it had. There's a recurrent spot where the pattern lolls like a broken neck and two bulbous eyes stare at you upside down. I got positively angry with the impertinence of it and the everlastingness. Up and down and sideways they crawl, and those absurd unblinking eyes are everywhere. There's one place where two breaths didn't match, and the eyes go up and down the line, one a little higher than the other. I never saw so much expression in an inanimate thing before, and we all know how much expression they have. I used to lie awake as a child and get more entertainment and terror out of blank walls and plain furniture than most children could find in a toy store. I remember what I kindly winked the knobs of a big old bureau used to have, and there was one chair that always seemed like a strong friend. I used to feel that if any of the other things looked too fierce, I could always hop into that chair and be safe. The furniture in this room is no worse than inharmonious, however, for we had to bring it all from downstairs. I suppose this was used as a playroom before they had to take the nursery things out, and no wonder I never saw such ravages as the children have made here. The wallpaper, as I said before, is torn off in spots, and it sticketh closer than a brother that must have had perseverance as well as hatred. And the floor is scratched and gouged and splintered. The plaster itself is dug out here and there, and this great heavy bed, which is all we found in the room, looks as if it had been through the wars. But I don't mind it a bit, only the paper. There comes John's sister, such a dear girl she is, and so careful of me. I must not let her find me writing. She is a perfect and enthusiastic housekeeper and hopes for no better profession. I verily believe she thinks it is writing which made me sick. And I can write when she is out, and see her a long way off from these windows. But there's one that commands the road, a lovely shaded winding road, and one that looks off over the country. A lovely country, too, full of great elms and velvet meadows. This wallpaper has a kind of sub-pattern in a different shade, a particularly irritating one, for you can only see it in certain lights, and not clearly then. But in the places where it isn't faded, the sun is set just so I can see a strange, provoking, formless sort of figure that seems to sulk out behind that silly and conspicuous front design. Their sister on the stairs. Well, the 4th of July is over. The people are all gone and I am tired out. John thought that it might do me good to see a little company, so we just had Mother and Nellie and the children down for a week. Of course, I didn't do a thing. Jenny sees to everything now. But it tired me all the same. John says if I don't pick up faster, he's going to send me to Ware Mitchell in the fall. But I don't want to go there at all. I had a friend who was in his hands once, and she says it is just like John and my brother, but only more so. Besides, it is such an undertaking to go so far. I don't feel as if it was worthwhile to turn my hand over for anything. I'm getting dreadfully fretful and querulous. I cry at nothing, and cry most of the time. Of course, I don't when John is here, or anybody else, but when I'm alone. And I am alone a good deal just now, and John is kept in town very often by serious cases, and Jenny is good and lets me alone when I want her to. So I walk a little in the garden or down that lovely lane, sit on the porch under the roses, and lie down up here a good deal. I'm getting really fond of the room in spite of the wallpaper, perhaps because of the wallpaper. It dwells in my mind so. I lie here on this great immovable bed, it is nailed down, I believe, and follow the pattern about by the hour. It is as good as gymnastics, I assure you. I start, we'll say, at the bottom, down in the corner over there where it has not been touched, and I determine for the 1000th time that I will follow this pointless pattern to some sort of conclusion. I know a little of the principles of design. I know this thing was not arranged on any laws of radiation or alternation or repetition or symmetry or anything else that I ever heard of. It is repeated, of course, by the breaths, but not otherwise. Looked at in one way, each breath stands alone. The bloated curves and flourishes, a kind of debased Romanesque, with delirium tremens, go waddling up and down in isolated columns of fatuity. But on the other hand, they connect diagonally, and the sprawling outlines run off in great slanting waves of optic horror, like a lot of wallowing seaweeds in full chase. The whole thing goes horizontally, too. At least it seems so, and I exhaust myself in trying to distinguish the order of its going in that direction. They have used a horizontal breath for a frieze, and that adds wonderfully to the confusion. There is at one end of the room where it is almost intact, and there, when the cross lights fade and the low sun shines directly upon it, I can almost fancy radiation. After all, the interminable grotesques seem to form around a common center and rush off in the headlong plunges of equal distraction. It makes me tired to follow it. I will take a nap, I guess. I don't know why I should write this. I don't want to, I don't feel able, and I know John would think it absurd, but I must say what I feel and think in some way. It is such a relief. But the effort is getting to be greater than the relief. Half the time now I am awfully lazy and lie down ever so much. John says I mustn't lose my strength, and he's made me take cod liver oil and lots of tonics and things, to say nothing of ale and wine and rare meat. Dear John, he loves me very dearly and hates to have me sick. I tried to have a real earnest, reasonable talk with him the other day, and tell him how I wished he would let me go and make a visit to Cousin Henry and Julia. He said I wasn't able to go, nor able to stand it after I got there, and I did not make out a very good case for myself, for I was crying before I had finished. It is getting to be a great effort for me to think straight, just as nervous weakness, I suppose. And dear John gathered me up in his arms and just carried me upstairs and laid me on the bed, and sat by me and read to me till he tired my head. He said I was his darling and his comfort and all he had, and that I must take care of myself for his sake and sleep well. He says no one but myself can help me out of it, and I must use my will and self-control and not let my silly fancies run away with me. There's one comfort. The baby is well and happy, and does not have to occupy this nursery with the horrid wallpaper. If we had not used it, that blessed child would have. What a fortunate escape. Why, I would have a child of mine, an impressionable little thing, live in such a room for worlds. I never thought of it before, but it is lucky that John kept me here after all. I can stand it so much easier than baby, you see. Of course, I never mention it to them any more. I am too wise. But I keep watch of it all the same. There are things in the paper that nobody knows but me, or ever will. Behind the outside pattern, the dim shapes get clearer every day. It is always the same shape, only very numerous. And it's like a woman, stooping down and creeping behind that pattern. I don't like it a bit. I wonder. I begin to think. I wish John would take me away from here. It is so hard to talk with John about my case, because he is so wise and because he loves me so. But I tried it last night. It was moonlight, the sun shines in all around, just as the sun does, and I hate to see it sometimes. It creeps so slowly and always comes in by one window or another. John was asleep, and I hated to waken him, so I kept still and watched the moonlight and felt that undulating wall of paper until I felt creepy. The faint figure behind seemed to shake the pattern, just as if she wanted to get out. I got up softly and went to feel and see if the paper did move, and when I came back, John was awake. "What is it, little girl?" he said. "Don't go walking about like that. You'll get cold." I thought it was a good time to talk, so I told him that I really was not gaining here, and that I wished he would take me away. "Why, darling," he said, "our lease will be up in 3 weeks, and I can't see how to leave before. The repairs are not done at home, and I cannot possibly leave town just now. Of course, if you were in any danger I could and would, but you really are better, dear, whether you can see it or not. I am a doctor, dear, and I know. You are gaining flesh and color, your appetite is better, and I feel really much easier about you." "I don't weigh a bit more," said I, "nor as much, and my appetite may be better in the evening when you are here, but it is worse in the morning when you are away." "Bless her little heart," said he with a big hug. "She shall be as sick as she pleases, but now let's improve the shining hours by going to sleep, and talk about it in the morning." "And you won't go away?" I asked gloomily. "Why, how can I, dear? It is only 3 weeks more, and then we would take a nice little trip of a few days while Jenny is getting the house ready. Really, dear, you are better." "Better in body, perhaps," I began, and stopped short, for he sat up straight and looked at me with such a stern, reproachful look that I could not say another word. "My darling," said he, "I beg of you for my sake and for our child's sake, as well as for your own, that you will never for one instant let that idea enter your mind. There is nothing so dangerous, so fascinating to a temperament like yours. It is a false and foolish fancy. Can you not trust me as a physician when I tell you so?" So of course I said no more on that score, and went to sleep before long. He thought I was asleep first, but I wasn't. I lay there for hours trying to decide whether that front pattern and the back pattern really did move together or separately. On a pattern like this, by daylight there is a lack of sequence, a defiance of law that is a constant irritant to a normal mind. The color is hideous enough, and unreliable enough, and infuriating enough, but the pattern is torturing. You think you have mastered it, but just as you get well underway in following, it turns a back somersault, and there you are. It slaps you in the face, knocks you down, and tramples upon you. It is like a bad dream. The outside patterns are florid arabesque, reminding one of a fungus. If you can imagine a toadstool in joints, an interminable string of toadstools, budding and sprouting in endless convolutions, why that is something like it. That is, sometimes. There's one marked peculiarity about this paper, a thing nobody seems to notice but myself, and that is that it changes when the light changes. When the sun shoots into the east window, I always watch for that first long, straight ray. It changes so quickly that I can never quite believe it. That is why I watch it always. By moonlight, the moon shines in all night when there is a moon. I wouldn't know it was the same paper. At night, in any kind of light, in twilight, candlelight, lamplight, and worst of all by moonlight, becomes bars, the outside pattern, I mean, and the woman behind it as plain as can be. I didn't realize for a long time what the thing was that's shown behind, the dim sub-pattern, but I am quite sure it is a woman. By daylight she is subdued, quiet. I fancy it is the pattern that keeps her so still. It is so puzzling. It keeps me quiet by the hour. I lie down ever so much now. John says it is good for me, and to sleep all I can. Indeed, he started the habit by making me lie down for an hour after each meal. It is a very bad habit, I am convinced, for, you see, I don't sleep. And that cultivates deceit, for I don't tell him I'm awake, oh no! The fact is, I'm getting a little afraid of John. He seems very odd sometimes, and even Jenny has an inexplicable look. It strikes me occasionally, just as a scientific hypothesis, that perhaps it is the paper. I have watched John when he did not know I was looking, and come into the room suddenly on the most innocent excuses, and I've caught him several times looking at the paper. And Jenny too. I caught Jenny with her hand on it once. She didn't know I was in the room, and when I asked her in a very quiet voice in the most restrained manner possible what she was doing with the paper, she turned around as if she had been caught stealing, and looked quite angry. I asked me why I should frighten her so. Then she said the paper stained everything it touched, and that she had found yellow smooches on all my clothes and John's, and wished we would be more careful. Did that not sound innocent? But now she was studying that pattern. I am determined that nobody shall find it out but myself. Life is very much more exciting now than it used to be. You see, I have something more to expect, to look forward to watch. I really do eat better, and am more quiet than I was. John is so pleased to see me improve. He laughed a little the other day, and I seemed to be flourishing in spite of my wallpaper. I turned it off with a sigh. It was a laugh. I had no intention of telling him it was because of the wallpaper. He would make fun of me. He might even want to take me away. But I don't want to leave now until I found it out. There's a week more. I think that will be enough. I'm feeling ever so much better. I don't sleep much at night, for it is so interesting to watch developments, but I sleep a good deal in the daytime. In the daytime it is tiresome and perplexing. There are always new shoots on the fungus, and new shades of yellow all over it. I cannot keep count of them, though I have tried conscientiously. It is a strange yellow, that wallpaper. It makes me think of all the yellow things I ever saw, not beautiful ones like buttercups, but old, foul, bad yellow things. But there's something else about that paper, the smell. I noticed it the moment we came into the room, but with so much air and sun it was not bad. Now we have had a week of the fog and rain, and whether the windows are open or not, the smell is here. It creeps all over the house. I find it hovering in the dining room, sulking in the parlor, hiding in the hall, lying in wait for me on the stairs. It even gets into my hair. Even when I go to ride, if I turn my head suddenly in surprise, there is that smell. Such a peculiar odor, too. I have spent hours trying to analyze it to find what it smelled like. It is not bad, at first, very gentle, but quite the subtlest, most enduring odor I've ever met. In this damp weather it is awful. I wake up in the night and find it hanging over me. It used to disturb me at first. I thought seriously of burning the house to reach the smell. But now I am used to it. The only thing I can think of that it is like is the color of the paper. A yellow smell. There's a very funny mark on this wall, low down near the mopboard, a streak that runs around the room. It goes behind every piece of furniture except the bed, a long, straight, even smooch, as if it had been rubbed over and over and over. I wonder how it was done and who did it and what they did it for. Round and 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 round. It makes me dizzy. I really have discovered something at last. Through watching it so much at night when it changes so, I finally found out. The front pattern does move, and no wonder the woman behind shakes it. Sometimes I think there are a great many women behind, and sometimes only one. And she crawls around fast, and her crawling shakes it all over. Then, in the very bright spots, she keeps still. In the very shady spots, she just takes hold of the bars and shakes them hard. And she is all the time trying to climb through, but nobody could climb through that pattern. It strangles so. I think that is why it has so many heads. They get through, then the pattern strangles them off and turns them upside down and makes their eyes white. If those heads were covered or taken off, it would not be half bad. I think that the woman gets out in the daytime, and I'll tell you why privately. I've seen her. I can see her out of every one of my windows. It's the same woman I know, but she's always creeping, and most women do not creep by daylight. I see her in that long, shaded lane, creeping up and down. I see her in those dark grape arbors, creeping all around the garden. I see her on that long road under the trees, creeping along, and when a carriage comes, she rides under the blackberry vines. I don't blame her a bit. It must be very humiliating to be caught creeping by daylight. I always lock the door when I creep by daylight. I can't do it at night, for I know John would suspect something at once. And John is so odd now, and I don't want to irritate him. I wish he would take another room. Besides, I don't want anybody to get that woman out at night but myself. I wonder if I could see her out of all the windows at once. But, turn as fast as I can always see out of one at a time. Though I always see her, she may be able to creep faster than I can turn. I watch her sometimes away off in the open country, creeping as fast as a cloud shadow in the high wind. If only that top pattern could be gotten off from the under one. I mean to try it little by little, and I found out that another funny thing, but I shan't tell you this time, for it does not do to trust people too much. There are only 2 more days to get this paper off, and I believe John is beginning to notice. I don't like the look in his eyes. I heard him ask Jenny a lot of professional questions about me. She had a very good report to give. She said I slept a good deal in the daytime. John knows I don't sleep very well at night, but I'm all so quiet. She asked me all sorts of questions, too, and pretended to be very loving and kind, as if I couldn't see through him. Still, I don't wonder he acts so, sleeping under this paper for 3 months. It only interests me, but I feel sure John and Jenny are secretly affected by it. Hurrah! This is the last day, but it is enough. John is to stay in town overnight and won't be out until this evening. Jenny wanted to sleep with me, a sly thing, but I told her I should undoubtedly rest better for a night all alone. That was clever, for I wasn't alone a bit. As soon as the moonlight, the poor thing began to crawl and shake the pattern. I got up and ran to help her. I pulled and she shook. I shook and she pulled. And before morning we had peeled off yards of that paper. I stood about as high as my head and half around the room. And then the sun came and that awful pattern began to laugh at me. I declared I would finish it today. We go away tomorrow, and they are moving all my furniture down again to leave things as they were before. Jenny looked in the wall in amazement, but I told her merrily that I did it out of pure spite at the vicious thing. She laughed and said she wouldn't mind doing it herself, but I must not get tired. How she betrayed herself that time. But I am here, and no person touches this paper but me, not alive. And she tried to get me out of the room. It was too patent. But I said it was so quiet and empty and clean now that I believed I would lie down again and sleep all I could. And not to wake me even for dinner, I would call when I woke. So now she is gone, and the servants are gone, and the things are gone, and there's nothing left but that great bedstead nailed down, with the canvas mattress we found on it. We shall sleep downstairs tonight, and take the boat home tomorrow. I quite enjoy the room now it is bare again. How those children did tear about here. The bedstead is fairly gnawed, but I must get to work. I have locked the door and thrown the key down to the front path. I don't want to go out, and I don't want to have anybody come in till John comes. I want to astonish him. I've got a rope up there that even Jenny did not find. If that woman does get out or tries to get away, I can tie her. But I forgot. I could not reach far without anything to stand on. This bed will not move. I tried to lift and push it until I was lame, and I got so angry I bit off a little piece at one corner, but it hurt my teeth. Then I peeled off the paper so I could reach standing on the floor. It sticks horribly and the pattern just enjoys it. All those strangled heads and bulbous eyes and waddling fungus growths shriek with derision. I'm getting angry enough to do something desperate. To jump out of the window would be an admirable exercise, but the bars are too strong to even try. Besides, I wouldn't do it. Of course not. I know well enough that a step like that is improper and might be misconstrued. I don't even like to look out of the windows even. There's so many of those creeping women, and they creep so fast. I wonder if they all come out of that paper. I wonder if they all come out of that wallpaper, as I did. But I'm securely fastened now by my well-hidden rope. You don't get me out on the road here. I suppose I shall have to get back behind the pattern when it comes night, and that is hard. It is so pleasant to be out in this great room and creep around as I please. I don't want to go outside. I won't, even if Jenny asks me to. For outside, you have to creep on the ground, and everything is green instead of yellow. But here I can creep smoothly on the floor, and my shoulder just fits in a long smooch around the wall, and I can not lose my way. Why, there's John at the door. It is no use, young man. You can't open it. How he does call and pound. Now he's crying for an axe. It would be a shame to break down that beautiful door. John, dear, said I in the greatest, gentlest voice. The key is down by the front steps, under a plantain leaf. That silenced him for a few moments. Then he said, very quietly indeed, "Open the door, my darling." "I can't," said I. "The key is down by the front door, under a plantain leaf." And then I said it again, several times, very gently and slowly, and said it so often that he had to go and see. And he got it, of course, and came in. He stopped short by the door. "What is the matter?" he cried. "For God's sake, what are you doing?" I just kept creeping just the same. I looked at him over my shoulder. "I've got out at last," said I, "in spite of you and Jane. And I've pulled off most of the paper so you can't put me back." Now why should that man have fainted? But he did, and right across my path by the wall, and I had to creep over him every time. And that is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. And that is where I'm going to leave it for tonight. Yeah. It's nice to be back. I don't know how often anything's gonna be for right now, but it's whatever. We're gonna work with what we can. I'll do things when I'm up to it. No guarantees, though. I had fun tonight. My voice is not going to thank me in the morning, as it is not thanking me right now. But let's see who's doing what right now, and I'm going to see if Ace is still live, because last I checked he was. But I want to make sure. Oh, just sheep. Alright, we can raid sheep. Alright, yeah. I think that's reasonable. Alright, yeah, perfect. Yep, I want to thank everyone for stopping by. I had a great